Hi, this is Tom from Living Monstrosity, also from Shades of Loss and Doomsday Sun. In September and October 2023, I spent 2 months in South Korea, and I've been wanting to find an interesting way to talk about the trip and share some of the photographs I took whilst I was over there. In September, this time last year, I spent 2 weeks in Gyeongju, which is full of historic sites and museums. The city itself is known as a museum without walls, and there are lots of parks and open spaces built around the ancient tombs of the royalty and nobles that lived there. So I'm going to share some of the photographs and take you on a little tour of some of Gyeongju's historic sites in a somewhat chronological order, using my own photography and trying to use information I gathered from the places themselves as the primary source for all the cool history stuff. So the most common site in Gyeongju are the tombs of the royals and nobles that lived throughout the city's ancient history, and these are the large grassy mounds, some of which are the size of small hills, dotted all around Gyeongju. Oleung, or the Five Tombs, or the Five Royal Tombs of Gyeongju, is the resting place of the founding family of the Silla Kingdom, which lasted from 57 BCE until 935 CE, with Gyeongju as the capital city. So buried in Oleung are the first king and queen of Silla, Pak Hyeokgeose and Lady Aryeong, along with their son, grandson, and their great-grandson, were the second, third, and fifth kings of Silla, respectively. These 5 people ruled between 57 BCE to 112 CE, so these would be the oldest royal tombs in Gyeongju. Pak Hyeokgeose was born in 69 BCE, and according to the Hyeokgeose, or the memorabilia of the 3 kingdoms, he was discovered by the chieftains of the 6 clans that lived in the area where Gyeongju is today. The Hyeokgeose describes the chieftains as banding together and praying for a leader, saying, "It is not good for us to live in scattered villages without protection. We are in danger of attack by strong enemies nearby. We must therefore seek a noble and glorious king to rule over us and defend us as our commander-in-chief." After praying for this, a flash of light erupted in the sky and a rainbow shone down from the heavens, and the rainbow terminated near a well. When the chieftains arrived at the well, they found a white horse bowing down before something, and the horse got spooked and flew up back to the heavens, taking the rainbow with it and leaving behind a giant red egg shaped like a gourd. The chieftains opened the egg and found a baby boy inside whose face shone like the sun, and the Hyeokgeose says the people danced for joy, and the birds and beasts sang and danced around the boy. Heaven and earth shook, and the sun and moon shone brightly, indicating that this was indeed the king they had prayed for. They named him King Hyeokgeose, meaning bright ruler. He was given the clan name Pak, which is westernized as Park usually, which is the Korean word for gourd, and he became progenitor of all the Park clans in Korea. On the same day that Hyeokgeose descended from the sky, so too did the girl who would become his wife, Lady Aryeong. According to the Hyeokgeose, a she-dragon descended from the sky and came to rest near a well named Aryongjong. Depending on which source you read, a baby girl was pulled from either the left or right ribcage of the dragon, which then flew away, and some stories depict the dragon dying and the girl being torn out of its corpse. Either way, the girl was born with a chicken beak instead of a mouth, but luckily it washed off when she was bathed in a nearby stream. The well Aryongjong today sits within the grounds of Oleung, marked by a commemorative stela, but the well itself is covered up. Pak Hyeokgeose and Lady Aryeong became king and queen of Silla at the age of 13 when the kingdom was founded in 57 BCE. And later on in 37 BCE, Pak Hyeokgeose constructed a fortress known as Gumsong, meaning golden fortress, with the city that sprung up around it bearing the same name. The kingdom at the time was not known as Silla, but the city and kingdom itself shared the name Sorabol, which means capital city. It's believed in Middle Korean this was shortened to Seobol before becoming Seoul in modern Korean, which is the name of the current capital of South Korea. The Hyeokgeose confirms that the country at this time was called Sorabol or Sobol, a native dialect word. The name Silla wasn't used for the kingdom until a few hundred years later, when King Jijung standardized the Chinese characters of the kingdom's name, which are now pronounced as Silla in modern Korean. And this leads us to our next historic site, which is also a tomb complex, Daejeon. So in addition to standardizing the pronunciation of Silla, King Jijung was also the first ruler to use the word king, which in Korean is Wang, and was used throughout the rest of Korea's history. notably in King Sejong the Great's name, Sejong Daewang. Previous rulers went by the title Isagum, beginning with Pak Hyeokgeose's grandson King Yuri, or Yuri Isagum, in 24 CE, and also Madabgan, beginning with King Naemul, or Naemul Madabgan, in 356 CE. It's not known for certain, but it is believed that King Jijung is buried in Cheonmachong, or the Tomb of the Heavenly Horse, within the modern complex Daereungwon in the center of Gyeongju. Daereungwon is a park containing many large tombs of Silla nobles. An entrance to the park is free, but to enter Cheonmachong, there's a fee of 3,000 won, or £1.50. There's a small museum built inside the tomb, with the central burial chamber on display, and the name of the tomb comes from a horse saddle found buried in the chamber depicting a chonma, or an 8-legged horse that flies using wings on its feet. The image is depicted also in a mosaic at the northern entrance to Daereungwon, and the horse itself is a symbol of Gyeongju that can be spotted all over the place. This area in the center of Gyeongju, around Daereungwon, contains lots and lots of tombs from Shilla's history. If you look on this map that was drawn, you can see historically this was a massive area, just a field filled with tombs. So just across the road from Daereungwon to the north, there are several open parks which you can just walk through at any time of day or night, filled with these tombs. There are several very large tombs just north of Daereungwon, and also in the area, in the field where they are, there's the Silla Dynasty Tombs Information Center, which is a small museum you can go into. And then there's also the excavated remains of Gumgwanchong, or Tomb of the Golden Crown, which also has a small museum inside and a cross-section display of the excavated tomb, showing you the construction process and how the tomb sits in the middle with the mound buried around it. To the south of Daereungwon, there's a large park that surrounds the Banwolsong, or Half Moon Fortress area, or the remains of that complex, which would have been a large palace in the center of Gyeongju, which you can also see on the map here. It's a beautiful park. You can get lots of stunning views of the scenery, and you can just see these tombs popping up everywhere in the distance, all around Gyeongju. It's also the home of one of Gyeongju's more famous landmarks and one of South Korea's more famous landmarks, Cheomsongdae, which was constructed during the reign of Queen Sondok. Queen Sondok is one of the playable characters in Sid Meier's Civilization VI, and she was also the ruler of Shilla, beginning in 632. She was one of the first female sovereigns in Asia, and her reign ended with her death in 647, roughly 13 years before Empress Wu Zetian would become the first legitimate female ruler of China in 660. In the second year of her reign, she oversaw the construction of Cheomsongdae, a celestial observatory that still stands today. It is surrounded by a beautiful park, the Banwolsong fortress area, filled with fields of flowers. Obviously you can see all the ruins, as we mentioned before, and it's sort of a hub. It's very much the center of the historic areas of Gyeongju, and if you walk through the park in different directions, you'll wind up in different other historic areas around Gyeongju. The Shilla Arts and Science Museum, located in Gyeongju Folkcraft Village, has displays showing how Cheomsongdae was constructed and used. And it acted as a celestial observatory, modelled on an earlier design built in Goguryeo, which was one of the other three kingdoms in Korea, and it went on to inspire similar structures in China and Japan. The year after constructing Cheomsongdae, she oversaw the construction of Bunghwangsa, or the Fragrant Imperial Temple, which also still survives today, although in a much smaller capacity than it did during its heyday. The stone pagoda that's there has collapsed inward from the top several stories, so it's not the complete structure that would have been constructed at the time. It's believed that the temple was built in response to an insult delivered by Emperor Taizong of Tang China, who refused to accept Queen Sondok's rule due to her gender. The Samguk-yusa tells a story of Taizong sending Sondok a painting of peony flowers along with some seeds, The flowers famously do not give off a scent, and the paintings she received depicted the flowers without any bees or butterflies around them, no insects having any interest in the flowers at all. Sondok recognised that this was meant as an insult from Taizong, mocking her for not having a husband, or even having anyone interested in being her husband. Sondok wouldn't be able to get back at Tang China during her own lifetime, but shortly after her reign, the Silla dynasty kicked the ever-living shit out of Tang China and defeated them after they were betrayed, so they did get their revenge eventually. Cheomseongdae and Bunhwangsa are two examples of sites constructed during Sondok's reign that are still standing today. Situated next to Bunhwangsa, however, are the ruins of a site that is unfortunately no longer standing. The site is known as Hwangryongsa, or Imperial Dragon Temple, which began construction well before Sondok's reign, during the reign of King Jinhung in 553. Originally, the site was intended to be a palace, but legend has it that a dragon descended from the sky early during its construction, so it was deemed to be a temple instead. The site was a fairly large complex, but the main temple building itself once housed a 16-foot tall golden statue of the Buddha, flanked by two smaller statues, and the legend has it that the gold came from King Ashoka of India, who'd tried to cast the statue, or tried to have the statue casted himself, but for whatever reason, the casting was unsuccessful. So the gold melted back down, and the blueprints for the statues was sent on a boat and shipped all the way throughout Asia. Wherever it stopped, people tried to cast the gold into these statues but were unable to, until it made its way to Silla and was cast successfully in the Hwangryongsa temple. Sondok's contribution to the temple site was the construction of a 9-story pagoda opposite the temple building, which housed the Buddha statue. Sondok had a difficult reign, being a female ruler, because none of the male rulers in Asia, be it within Korea or certainly in China, took her seriously during her reign. So as a show of strength and a show of unity for Silla, she was advised to build this pagoda. A monk named Jiajang, who had been studying away in Tang China for several years, was recalled to Silla, and he advised her to construct the pagoda. And a famous architect from the neighbouring kingdom of Baekje, which Silla would later conquer, was tasked with overseeing the construction. It was completed in 645, 2 years before Sondok's death, and at the time it was the tallest structure in Asia, standing at 80 metres or 260 foot tall. There were paintings and murals designed on the side of the pagoda, on the outside walls, and some of the scenes were so realistic that birds would crash into the walls and die, thinking that they were going to land on the branch of a real tree. The pagoda, alongside the rest of the temple complex, stood until 1238, when it was burnt down during the Mongol invasion of Korea. And nowadays, the only thing that exists are the stone foundations of the buildings that were there at the time. However, there is a museum, the Hwangryongsa History and Culture Hall, containing a scale replica of the tower. On the ground floor of the museum is the scale replica, and there is also a full-size replica of one of the wooden support columns that would have been on the ground floor of the tower. The museum has lots of displays depicting the construction of the tower, which was done without any nails. It was all interlocking pieces of wood, so there's a lot of history and information in the museum. And on the top floor, there is a 1:1 scale replica of the corner, or one of the corners of the 9th floor of the pagoda, the top floor of the pagoda. It's only a very small section, but it is a 1:1 scale replica. And on the walls next to this, there are projections of sort of a bird's eye view of Gyeongju at the time. So it gives you an idea of what standing at the top of this 9-story structure would have been like. Something that I wasn't aware of prior to visiting Gyeongju, and something that the museum doesn't tell you, is that there is a full-scale replica of the Hwangryongsa Pagoda located in Gyeongju, which is the Jungdo Tower in Hwangryongwon, a business center and hotel that hosts conferences. So the hotel structure is modeled after Hwangryongsa, obviously with modern construction. And not far away, there is another tower called Gyeongju Tower, located in Gyeongju Expo. The Gyeongju Tower is constructed with a hollowed out center, the shape and size of what Hwangryongsa would have been. So it's almost like a frame built around an invisible replica of the pagoda, so offering like a reverse silhouette of the building. These two towers were actually married to each other in 2015, and the city gave them an official wedding ceremony. Queen Sondok's tomb is also located in Gyeongju, south of the main historic area. It resides on a small mountain called Nangsan, which is more of a large hill, but it sits at the top of that mountain in a clearing amongst the pine trees. And the mountain itself was once considered sacred and to be a guardian mountain of the city of Gyeongju. There are lots of interesting legends and stories about Sondok, which is why she's one of the most famous rulers from the Silla Kingdom. The Samguk goes into quite some detail about her reign and the legends around her. One of the more interesting ones is that there was a man named Jagui who was, I guess, obsessed with Queen Sondok. She was reported as being very beautiful, and on some of the mountains in Gyeongju, there are depictions of a female Buddha, which are rumored to have been modeled after her because of her beauty. And this guy, Jagui, used to follow her around to various engagements and wait outside to try and catch a glimpse of her or try and meet her, but he never was able to. There was one time that he followed her and was waiting outside for her so he could meet her, and he wound up falling asleep. And this was the time that Sondok actually walked past him and noticed him. She asked one of her guards who he was, and the guard told her that it was just some guy that was obsessed with her, sort of following around, hoping to meet her. She didn't want to wake him, so she took off one of her bracelets and left it next to him whilst he was sleeping, and then went on her way. When Jagui awoke, he was so upset that he missed his opportunity to meet Queen Sondok that he burst into flame and became a fire spirit and burnt down several nearby buildings. So as we mentioned before, Chomsongdae sits in essentially the center of the Gyeongju historic areas. Everything else sort of spans out from around it. If you head east through the park from Chomsongdae, walking through all the fields of the flowers past the ruins of Banwolsong, you will eventually reach Donggung Palace and Walji Pond. I'll just stop here to show you my favourite picture that I took whilst I was in Korea. It was on my first night in Gyeongju after walking to Walji Pond at sunset, just opposite the entrance to Walji Pond. There's a lot of these really pretty lanterns about, and I snapped this photograph, which I just really like. There's also a small building which has a painting of the map of Gyeongju that's also in the Silla Arts and Sciences Museum, so you can see that in central Gyeongju. So the remains of Donggung Palace and Walji Pond, the pond formerly known as Anapji, were constructed during the reign of King Munmu in 674. The site fell into disrepair after the fall of Silla to Goryeo, the successor state that conquered Silla, and the pond was finally dredged and the palace area partially rebuilt in 1974. So the pond has been reconstructed and the walls around it, and then several small buildings around the area. There's also a scale model of the palace site actually built in one of the reconstructed buildings. And if you go to Gyeongju Museum as well, there's also another diorama of Walji Pond following its reconstruction, or as it should have been originally. King Munmu himself is regarded as the first leader of unified Silla, following the reign of his father King Muyol, who oversaw Shilla's conquering of its rival kingdom Baekje. King Muyol defeated Baekje with the help of Tang China in the decades after Queen Sondok's reign, and his son King Munmu went on to conquer the other rival kingdom, Goguryeo, which formed the Three Kingdoms of Korea during the Three Kingdoms period, again with the help of Tang China. And this allowed Silla to unite the Korean peninsula in a way that resembled the modern borders of South Korea. We're going to sidestep here into Baekje's history slightly, as this relates to previous Living Monstrosity content. The song Falling Flowers is inspired by an event that took place around the end of Baekje's rule when it was conquered by Silla. So the combined forces of Silla and the Tang dynasty defeated Baekje in the Battle of Hwansangbol. Once news of this defeat made its way back to Sabi, the court ladies of the Baekje kingdom climbed up Buso-san, or Mount Buso, in modern-day Buyo, and they threw themselves from a cliff into the river below. to avoid falling into enemy hands. And this location nowadays is known as Nakwaam. It's on the cliff overlooking the Goom River on Busasan, and the English translation of that is the Rock of Falling Flowers, which was a name given to it by a Joseon poet several hundred years after the event took place to commemorate the women that threw themselves to their death to avoid falling into enemy hands. But that followed the defeat of Baekje by the combined forces of Silla and Tang under King Muyol. As we mentioned when talking about Queen Sondok, Tang China would betray Silla once it had become unified Silla and try to overthrow it to gain control of the Korean peninsula in its entirety after Silla had done the majority of the hard work for them. But King Munmu was able to drive Tang out of the peninsula completely and prevent Korea from just becoming another part of China. King Munmu's tomb is another popular tourist attraction in Gyeongju that you have to leave the city behind and take a trip to the coast. So for me, that was 2 separate buses from Gyeongju out to the Eastern Sea. King Munmu's tomb is an underwater tomb which is located in some rocks just off the coast, which you can see from the beach once you get there. King Munmu was King Munmu became known after his death as the Dragon King, and it's believed that his spirit turned into a great blue dragon spirit that protected the Eastern Sea. We're going to jump forward in time slightly to visit 2 more of Gyeongju's major tourist attractions from the Silla dynasty, Bulguksa and Sokguram. So Bulguksa is a very famous temple in South Korea, probably the most famous site in Gyeongju, maybe more so than Cheomsongdae, alongside maybe places in Seoul. It's one of the places you're most likely to see if you buy like a tourist book or visit a website or a blog or something tourist related talking about South Korea, like top 10 sites to see in South Korea kind of thing. That's how famous it is. So Bulguksa, first of all, is built at the foot of Tohamsan, and originally there was a small temple built in 528 under King Bopung, who ruled after King Jijung, the guy who standardized the pronunciation of Silla, and is believed to be buried in Jeonmachong. And he was succeeded by his nephew King Jinhung, the guy who began the construction of Hwanyongsa, upon which Queen Sondok would later build the 9-story pagoda. So there was a small temple built there in the 500s. According to the Samguk-yusa, construction of the modern temple began in 751 and was completed in 774. Renovations were undertaken during the Goryeo and Joseon periods, and the wooden sections of the temple were burnt down during the Imjin Wars, where the Japanese invaded Korea the first time. Reconstructions and renovation continued up until the 1800s, with further restoration work having to be undertaken following World War II and the Korean War. But the stone foundations of the temple survive from the original construction during the Silla period. It's a huge temple. It's very scenic, very picturesque. One of the most heavily photographed places in Korea. As I mentioned, if you go to a top 10 places to visit in South Korea kind of thing, you'll likely see a picture that looks like this, which I took. Atop Tohamsan, so above Bulguksa, on the top of the same mountain, is Sokguram, or Sokguram Grotto, which was constructed around the same time as Bulguksa, and was originally known as Sokbulsa. It is a grotto featuring a big statue of the Buddha, and in the Silla Arts and Sciences Museum, as well as a few other places around Gyeongju, and some other museums in Korea as well, you can see the construction of Sokguram, how it would have looked in its original state. Obviously the same ravages of time that happened to Bulguksa and lots of other sites in Korea happened to Sokguram as well. So when you're looking at it today, after you walk along the mountain trail to get to it, it's just a little, I don't want to say hut, but like a very small miniature version of like a temple with a small hill behind it that looks like one of the tombs you'd see in Gyeongju. Inside that is a huge stone dome containing the statue of the Buddha in Bulguksa. It's now behind glass to protect it from humidity, and you're not allowed to take photographs or video once you're inside. But the trail leading to Sokguram offers some great views of Gyeongju, or some great views of fog if it's a foggy day when you visit. Just after the entrance to the car park, there's a pavilion with a bronze bell. You can pay 1,001, like 50p, to ring the bell. There is a hiking trail leading from Bulgukseor to Sokguram, but when I visited it was just after the summer monsoon season, which is still going on now this year. I believe there's been some storm damage quite severely in Korea this year, flooding and landslides, and none of that happened while I was there last year, but you could see the damage that had been left behind by it on Tomsan and some other places in Gyeongju. I don't have as much to say history-wise about the two sites. They're very interesting and very nice and well worth a visit, but mainly just some nice pictures of the area. The last site that I'm going to mention in this video is Woljongyo Bridge, another stunningly beautiful landmark in Gyeongju that's been very heavily photographed, and for good reason. Originally it was constructed in 750, so around a similar time that Bulgukseor would have been completed, maybe 20 years or so before Bulgukseor would have been completed, but at a roughly similar time in the Silla Kingdom. It burned down during the Joseon dynasty, and research into rebuilding the bridge didn't begin until the 1980s, and the final reconstructions were done in 2018. So a lot of time and effort and study went into faithfully reconstructing the bridge in its original design with the original colours and roof tiles, that kind of thing. It is south of Cheomsongdae, maybe a 5-minute walk from Cheomsongdae through the park, and I'll just share some photos of it. There's not a massive amount of historical facts about the bridge. It's just really nice. Made for some good photographs. So I spent 2 weeks in Gyeongju in total at the beginning of my trip to Korea, after spending a week in Seoul, and I saw a lot in those 2 weeks, but there's still so much that I didn't get around to seeing, just with the sheer volume of places to visit. I could have easily maybe spent a month in Gyeongju and not got bored, whereas there's some other places where I decided to stay for like 2 weeks instead of one, where I wish I'd maybe only stayed a week and then gone somewhere else instead, explored a bit more. Busan and Seoul, for example. I've spent a lot of time in Seoul, and I wish towards the end of my trip I'd maybe taken a day or two to revisit Gyeongju, because the first time I was there, it still felt like the end of summer. The autumn leaves hadn't come in yet, but by the end of October, when I was in Soraksan and then Seoul, the autumn colours had started to come in, especially around Soraksan. So I really wish I'd maybe taken a day just to go back down to Gyeongju towards the end of October, just before I left, to see it in the autumn colours. So maybe next time. But I hope you've enjoyed the pictures that I've shared and found the history that I've tried to talk about interesting. So thanks very much. Have a good one. There's also a K-pop museum